To the pledge of allegiance. We're not there yet.
No, like you can get up and start if you like. We used to let that happen. That would have been really good.
I'm good. I'm going through like already marking this.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order and request a roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff.
Here.
Ms. Kalinowski. Here. Mr. Bush.
Here.
Vice President Darrow.
Here.
President McClelland.
Here. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was funny.
Members have had the chance to review our board meeting minutes from the 13th of May. Without any changes to that, or if there aren't any changes to that, I'd request a motion, please.
Second.
Mr. Bush, Ms. Kalinowski, roll call, please.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Vice President Darrow.
Yes.
President McClelland.
Yes. Now to tonight's agenda, any additions or corrections?
None, thank you.
With none, could I have a motion for approval of tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Kalinowski, Mr. Newmoff, roll call, please.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Vice President Darrow.
Yes.
President McClelland.
Yes. Communications to the board, Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan. I'm going to be brief this evening. I just want to remind everyone, we had a couple phone calls. The first day of school for all students in grades 1 through 12 is August 15th, 2019. So it is on our website. The calendar is posted for the 2019-2020 school year, but the first day of school is August 15th. In addition to that, summer construction continues across the school district for all the capital repairs, replacements, or other improvements that are taking place. We ask everyone to please remain patient, respect the caution tape, respect the closed sidewalk signs, respect the road closed signs, respect the mountain of equipment that's everywhere and anywhere across the school campus so that everyone can stay safe. But construction is proceeding well. Roofs are on schedule, both at the high school for the metal roof replacement and the primary school. The ELC playground, the reinstallation is now underway. The demolition is complete. They actually started to install new equipment today at the Early Learning Center. So it is proceeding on schedule. Things are moving fairly well despite the rain. Rain's had a few interim issues with the roofs, but overall, we're still on schedule. We anticipate that we'll still be on completion on schedule. So for parent perspectives, first day of school is August 15th, and please respect road closed, caution tape, sidewalks closed, cones. If it says do not enter, it really means do not enter. It just saves some conversation. So I would ask everyone to please be respectful of the construction workers or the vendors and maintenance workers that are across the school campus to ensure everyone can stay safe.
Very good. Thank you very much. Our next item is I know everyone's excited about this. We're finally got the results back of our community survey. And Marty Saperstein of Saperstein Associates is here. And Marty, the floor is yours to give us your presentation.
Well, I am delighted to be here. I'm especially delighted to walk into a room and see my work up on the screen already. So I'm the superintendent for that. And I notice some of you have paper copies of the presentation. The version you have is slightly outdated because I am a compulsive changer of things until the very last moment, and in many cases, beyond the last moment. But the superintendent can share the more current copy. So this research, the purpose of this was to explore perceptions of the New Albany schools among the district's residents, and it taps all sorts of opinions on lots of school-related issues, but it does so with two perspectives. The first, and I'll move through that first, is a community perspective, parents and non-parents alike. But then it also taps the perspectives of parents alone, comparing them to non-parents, and you'll see some interesting differences there. So it seems appropriate to tell you a little bit about the methodology. These were telephone interviews, 450 of them, all adult residents of the school district. And 300 of those interviews were conducted with adults from the district picked out randomly from a list of registered voters. And of those 300 interviews, 125 were residents, that's about 42%, were parents, residents who are also parents. And when the superintendent and I originally talked about this survey, it didn't seem like that was going to be enough to talk about parents K-12. So we decided to do an additional 150 interviews with parents chosen at random from lists provided by the schools. And you'll notice in my little barely legible footnote is that when I use the term parents, I'm referring to caregivers in the broadest way. So that could include grandparents, for example. So this procedure, as I alluded to earlier, produces two robust analyses, one of the community, but another of parents. So the 275 comes from the 125 and the 150. And then the margin of error for this survey is plus or minus 5.7 percentage points roughly for each sample. So you should know that all of these interviews were conducted between May 6th and May 25th. They averaged 16 minutes in length. They were completed on cell phones and landlines. If I had done this 10 years ago, those percentages would have been reversed. And if I ever do this again, if I live long enough, then it'll be 100% cell phones, and people will scratch their heads and say, what are landlines? To complete the 450 interviews, we had to call 7,751 unique telephone numbers, almost all of them, maybe all of them, multiple times, for a ratio of 17:1. And I tell you this because when I started 39 and a half years ago, that ratio was 4:1. We'd buy 4 telephone numbers. So now the advent of cell phones does two things: makes the data more reliable, but it makes the project more expensive. You just got to dial more numbers. And then finally, as the following table demonstrates, the resident comprising the community sample reflect all adults living in the district on several key dimensions listed there. And you can see from here that when you look at geography, kids in schools, gender, and age, our community sample matches population parameters, not perfectly, but really closely. Okay, let's do first the community. And I noticed that the font is different from the original font, so it may cause some spacing issues, and I'll try to point that out if it's a problem. Okay, so let's talk first about overall impressions of the schools. And what I'm going to do first with each section is summarize a little bit about what I found, then I'll show you some data. So first, 9 out of 10 residents believe the New Albany schools are excellent or good. That means very few have negative impressions of the schools. At least as many consider the New Albany schools well-maintained, safe for students, and committed to creating a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic and developmental outcomes for each student. And I know that that wording is from your mission, so that's reflected in the survey 9 out of 10 times for respondents. More than 7 out of 10 residents claim the schools are heading in the right direction. And for a plurality of residents, providing a quality education and a safe environment should be the district's highest priorities. Okay, so here you can see that 55% of the respondents consider the schools excellent, 35% good. And when you look at by age, this is sort of interesting. So the youngest respondents in the 18 to 34 year age group are more likely to say the schools are excellent than the oldest cohort at 41%. And if you look at geography, this won't be all that surprising because there's a correlation between age and geography, that the Plain Township residents, only 30% said excellent compared to higher numbers for those in New Albany and residents in Columbus. And then As they look to the future, 3 out of 4 residents believe the New Albany schools are heading in the right direction. That's the 73%. And if we look by age, you can see again that the oldest residents are the least supportive. But if you look at the older residents in this case, lots of them have no opinion. And I point that out because that's going to prove to be a communications opportunity. And then if you look by geography, you can see that Plain Township is sandwiched between 2 higher percentages for the school, for the New Albany residents, and for the Columbus residents. And here are those data. So the school is maintained, safe, friendly and welcoming, all the things I mentioned before, but what's to be noted here is not only are the percentages high, but a substantial portion of those bars are red, which means people agree strongly. And this is important because you have almost no negative opinion. So as you think about the future and change, the only change you can really muster when the number is 98%, I mean, you have no place really to go but down. The place that you can, where there's opportunity, is in the blue portion of the bar, except for maybe the campus is well maintained. You probably maxed that out. So I don't present the negatives because there really aren't any. And the agree strongly and somewhat are where the line divides. That's where the opportunity is, in the blue portion of the bar. So then in an open-ended question, we asked, well, what do you like most about the New Albany schools? And we took all of the open-ended comments, which are available to be read, and we put them into a graphic. So high-quality education was said most often, more often than anything else. So that big sphere represents about 30%. So 3 out of 10 residents said, what I like most is a high quality education, followed by the campus and buildings and grounds, and then teachers, all the way down to the smaller spheres. And then we said, in a second open-ended question, well, what should the Board of Ed and administrative staff consider their highest priorities? And here, continuing to provide that high-quality education and keeping kids safe. And this will prove to be interesting in a minute, because notice, spend funds wisely is higher than a lot of the little spheres, but it's not the top 2. Okay, so satisfaction with school officials. Now we're still in the community section. So at least 8 out of 10 residents are satisfied with the efforts of school officials to facilitate commercial growth and development, keep residents informed, and plan for the future. According to 7 out of 10 fewer, school officials seek input and feedback from the community, listen to the concerns of residents, typically when important decisions are being made, and listen to the concerns of residents and manage the district's finances wisely. Fewer residents, now we're down to 6 out of 10, are impressed with efforts to implement cost savings to stretch taxpayers' dollars. So while it's still 6 out of 10, that's the lowest. Let's look at the data. So here you can see lots of high numbers, and here I've included the don't know. So that 85% at the top, the first bar, that's of people with an opinion. And that, as was true within the last numbers, but of the people with an opinion, 85% are satisfied with how the district facilitates commercial growth and development. But of the total, a third don't have any opinion. On down through the 20% for seeking input and feedback. Notice here that the red part of the bar is not always the longer. That's the many no opinion. Oh, and this, we'll come back and revisit this, that on keeping local residents informed, there's sort of a little tiny gender gap. So you'll see women are more satisfied than men by a half a dozen or so. And you're shaking your head, I bet, yeah, that probably makes sense. It's interesting though, and you'll see some reference to that later. Okay, and then here, fiscal responsibility. Notice here, the lines, the bars are still long in the 70s, but the red portion is shrunk a little. And then being fiscally responsible from high to low is inversely related to age. Goes from 84% to that youngest age cohort to only 63% to the oldest cohort. And again, high levels of residents with no opinion. Here's that gender difference again. So it suggests to me that men apparently are less likely than women to feel informed and to believe that school officials, listen to local residents. Another opportunity for communication. And then here are the last two. And so on the implementing cost-saving measures, 40% of the people had no opinion at all, could not voice an opinion. And of those who could, 6 out of 10 were satisfied, but few were very satisfied. And you can see again the relationship to age. 45% of the oldest cohort was satisfied. So then there were some district initiatives we tested, and residents were presented with 4 that school officials consider high priority. And the trick here was to identify, not to rate each one, but essentially to rank them by saying which one was most important. And the 4 include academic achievement and growth, fiscal responsibility, student safety, and social emotional well-being and mental health supports. So those are the 4 presented, and the question was which one's most important. And here you'll see a couple of things that are interesting. Academic achievement and growth was most important for a plurality of the respondents, 1 out of 3. But social emotional well-being and student safety were pretty close behind, not that much different. So it's not like academic achievement and growth ran away with the rating. And then fiscal responsibility, much lower. Not to say that it's not important, it just doesn't rate as high as things that represent your mission. Residents were asked, is there anything you'd like to see the New Albany schools start doing, stop doing, or doing better? Many of the comments involve new programs and services, such as full-day kindergarten, classes for foreign languages not currently taught, and more security on campus. And then other comments reflect changes in policies and practices, such as greater fiscal transparency, fewer emails, and less standardized testing. So I'm going to show you just the smattering of comments so you can get a feel for what your residents said, but all of the comments are available and definitely worth reading. So you can see, so for example, begin an IB program, might be a new program, offer all-day kindergarten as a standard without extra cost program, but then some of the policies are things like, well, stop sending out emails, and you'll see on this slide other, so it would be better with diversity of faculty. So some are things that clearly cost money, and other things are things that perhaps don't cost money. And this is why this is important, because we asked this question after this: if the suggested changes require additional funding, less than half the community is likely to support a property tax increase to provide that funding. Okay, so that's the 44%. So then if you look at age, your oldest residents, only 31% support it. If you look at geography, you'll see even in New Albany and Columbus, you don't have a majority. And parents, 48%. But what's interesting here, makes this question a little difficult to interpret, is many of the suggestions may have been offered perhaps correctly with the expectation that additional revenue would not be needed, right? So if they said, send fewer emails, well, they wouldn't want to pay more money for that, just do that. So it makes this question a little odd. And then to try to go back and figure out which of the suggestions would cost money was real tricky to do, because it's not clear which would cost money and which wouldn't cost money. Okay, Moving on to parents. So the children identified by the parents in this study are enrolled in the district's facilities and percentages that approximate actual enrollment. This turns out to be important because it's not true that parents of elementary age children have the same opinions as parents of high school children. And then, predictably, parents of children enrolled in the schools compared with non-parents tend to be younger, no surprise, and a little more likely to reside in Columbus. What really, this won't shock you at all, but shocked me. So among the parents, 81% of the parents are 35 to 54, which I'm assuming you know that, but compared with 27% of the non-parents. That's a huge difference, and it gives you some sense of these two vastly different constituencies, parents and non-parents. So let's go back to overall impressions. Now we're looking at parents. So 2 out of 3 parents considered the New Albany schools excellent. Okay. Even more consider the district on track, heading in the right direction. Okay. Almost all believe the New Albany schools are friendly and welcoming, well-maintained, safe for students, and committed to creating the culture of accountability we referenced before. Perceptions of non-parents and parents of the oldest children tend to be less positive. Okay, so here you can see in this excellent, good, fair, poor rating, 67% said excellent and 29% said good. So that's a high number. Note that if A is excellent, B is good, C, D, and F, the C, D, and F category only got 3%. So you made a tiny number of people unhappy. That's actually better than you might expect. Let's see, really low. Okay, so what do we know? Non-parents, 51% said excellent. But even and then 36% said good. But even the non-parents are important to notice that average, poor, and failing is still only 7%. So even among non-parents, while it's true that the perceptions are not as positive as those for parents, they're still high. They're still high. And then, so look at this. So if you scan down, this is by grade span. So the youngest grade span, right, those parents are the most likely to feel the schools are excellent. And then as you go down through the, from the primary grades into middle school and high school, through the intermediate grades, you get a decreasing percentage of excellent, but still a majority. And then nearly 9 out of 10 parents agree that the schools are heading in the right direction. Non-parents are less sanguine, as are parents of the oldest children, but more likely to be uninformed than negative. It's the point I made earlier. So if you look at the non-parents, 64% say right direction, right? That's close to 2 out of 3. But the not sures are 21%, much higher. Important, another opportunity to communicate with folks. And then right direction follows the same pattern we saw earlier. The most positive responses are at the earliest grade cohort. And then you've seen these bars before for the community. Now this is just for parents. Look how high those numbers are. And look how long the red portion of the bars are. And even here, the little ovals to the right, those are the non-parents numbers. There's a little footnote down at the bottom. Even those numbers are pretty high for this battery of items. So almost no difference for the well-maintained and very little difference for the schools are safe. So parents and non-parents on these 4 dimensions, pretty similar. How about school responsibilities? So when parents were queried on 5 responsibilities of the New Albany schools, the 2 most important were academic excellence and mental health supports. By contrast, few parents consider transportation to and from school all that important. Okay, so this is a little donut chart. You can see almost 9 out of 10 said academic excellence, mental health support was next, followed by arts and music, sports, transportation. Why is this a donut? Because those numbers can add up to more than 100. We wanted folks to pick 2 as opposed to a pie chart where they would pick 1. What's kind of notable is that if you look at arts and music versus sports, so arts and music was important to more of the youngest kids. It's a little difference, but probably predictable. And then if you look at sports, they were more important, not to the youngest parents, but a little older, middle school and high school parents. And I show you things like this, not because I don't think you know them, I'm sure you do, but to give you some confidence that the data are not entirely random. Okay, initiatives. Of the 4 initiatives school officials describe as high priority, a plurality of parents consider academic achievement and growth the top priority. Almost as many, however, favored student safety and social emotional well-being and mental health supports. You saw these before, but look now, they're closer than you saw for the community. In fact, there's no difference between the middle 2. And fiscal responsibility, which was like 13%, is now half that. And what's also notable is that there really isn't all that much difference, certainly not in the ranking for non-parents. So when you think about academic achievement and growth, that's important. And when you think of social emotional, that's important. And when you think of safety, those are extremely important. School environment. At least 9 out of 10 parents agree their children feel safe at school, fit in at school, and have a caring relationship with at least one adult at school. Oops, come back. Nearly all parents also agree they feel welcome and comfortable when visiting the school their child attends. And here those dimensions are. Once again, not only are the numbers large, almost 100%, but look how long the red portion of the bar is. It's hard to make significant improvement when the numbers are like that. Yes, most parents strongly agree. All right, well-being programs. So most parents agree that the New Albany schools are focused on the social and emotional needs of children and provide programs and staff to address those needs. Boom. Those are the 4 statements, and all very high. Some variations, I look at the second one, school counselors are available for kids during the school day. That's got a very long agree strongly, and the other 3 are about the same, a little bit shorter. But again, you're talking about 9 out of 10 agreeing with those statements. And if you look at it, this last one, programs for parents, you don't see much difference by grade span. They're all high 70s, high 80s, low 90s, pretty similar. And we've seen plenty of times where those numbers are not so similar. How about classes? Nearly all parents agree, many strongly, that their kids are challenged academically, teachers are partners who value the input of parents. The data they receive about their child is clearly explained, more challenging work is available for the students who need it. Teachers help students to catch up when they fall behind, and teachers notice when students have trouble learning. So look at the numbers, and again, high numbers, long red bars. And here, this is really something I found interesting, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So the statement, third one down, says, I received clearly presented data that explain my child's academic performance. And you start out at 93%, but for the high school, you get down to 77%. So this is not accidental, I don't think. I did some focus groups around the state of Ohio, talking with parents about the report cards that the state issues. And we got sort of the same result because the parents of the youngest children, when they got all this information back, the kids are doing math like subtraction and addition, so the parents understood the content. But with the older parents, with the kids with parents with older kids, that 77% could reflect not the quality of information, but the type of information and the level of difficulty that it is. So this is very consistent with an earlier potentially related finding. And here are the last two here. This is catch up if they fall behind and students have trouble learning something, teachers notice. Here, if you notice, the grade spans, the high school students, parents of those kids are the least likely to agree with that statement, although it's still close to 80%. 7 out of 10 parents believe that discipline at the child's school is adequately strict. That's the big green portion of the pie. Roughly 2 out of 10 disagree, with most claiming it's not strict enough. And if you look at the grade span, you don't see huge difference in there. Administrators. At least 8 out of 10 parents agree, again, many strongly, that the district's administrative staff are visible on campus before and after school, ensure appropriate lines of communication, value and engage parents, provide strong lines of communication to inform and engage parents, and are easy for students to talk with. So here are the bars again, long bars, lots of red, lots of agree strongly. And if you look at the grade spans, the least true at high school. And I kind of bet that's true. It's probably more difficult for high school kids to talk to school adults. Okay, satisfaction with school officials. At least 9 out of 10 are satisfied with how school officials keep local residents informed, facilitate commercial growth and development, and plan for the future. At least 8 out of 10 are satisfied with how school officials manage the district's finances, seek input and feedback, and listen to the concerns of local residents. So among non-parents, across all of these issues, satisfaction on average is 17 percentage points lower, with the greatest differences in the following areas: listening to the concerns of local residents, 23% percentage point difference, managing the district's finances, being transparent about the district's finances, and implementing cost-saving measures to extend taxpayer dollars through 2023. So the 21% for the last three, I checked that 14 times. It just turned out that way. But, so the first one is a communications issue. We've talked about that. And then one of the other three, they're all sort of financial things. So this gives you some clear sense, not that you didn't know it previously, of what's on the minds of non-parents. And then, on average, non-parents were twice as likely to have no opinion on these issues. So not only are they less positive, but they're also much more likely not to even offer an opinion. So the average was 32%. So a third of our respondents couldn't even offer an opinion from the non-parent side. Okay, so if you look, you can see that long bars, all in this first slide, high 80s, low 90s. Notice the red portion of the bar is shrinking for the being fiscally responsible. But you'll notice that in the non-parent ovals on the left, pretty substantial differences. So 93 versus 78, or the last one, being fiscally responsible, 87 versus 69. And then here's another 4 of those statements. And you'll see again, well, these are all in the mid 80s. The non-parents are in the mid to high 60s. Big difference, big difference. And then here are the last two. So implementing the cost-saving measures, well, 78% of the parents were satisfied. It was down to 57% for the non-parents. Contact with school officials. So 1 parent in 5 contacted a school official during the past year. So that would be they contacted either once or more than once. Among non-parents, the figure is lower, 12% versus what, 22%, predictably. That's not news. And then across all grade spans, it's pretty even. It's not like it's just the elementary parents contacting a lot and the high school parents not. Pretty even. And then those contacted most often include the superintendent, building administrators, district staff, and board members. Yeah, I see you nodding head, so yes. Okay, so among parents, the most common contacts involve in-person visits and email. Phone calls were less common. Okay, so phone calls, look at that, 17%. Email 30, in-person 52%. So if you look at in person, now these numbers are really small, so I just throw this out. This is a little pattern. So if you look at the in-person, the parents of the primary grade kids were the least likely to come in person, but the most likely to use email. So you can see if that squares with what you know about contacts.
Still all in person.
And then among parents who contacted a school official, a majority were satisfied with how they were treated. So you can see more than 70% were in the very or somewhat satisfied. Some were not, and explain why. And I'm going to give you some examples. But what's really interesting, the people we spoke with, their answers to this question were really articulate.
Very specific.
I mean, it's like, yeah, they were from New Albany, you could tell. And there weren't a huge number of folks who were dissatisfied, so there's not a huge number of examples. But these reflect specific instances as opposed to sort of vague, I just didn't like the service I got. And what's interesting is the question asked people to focus on the customer service, like nobody called me back or whatever. And some of these are actually substantive responses. They don't like the outcome. And sometimes it's different between bad service and bad news. Sometimes people get that confused. Okay, information and events on campus. Among parents, the district's website is by far the most popular source of information about the New Albany schools, as it is for non-parents. So it makes you wonder, what'd you do before the website? I mean, 73%, that's their most common source. And you can see that the school itself, school emails and newswire all weigh in. But on the non-parent side, 48% said the district website as well. And then for most parents, the amount of news and information they receive about the New Albany schools is adequate. Only a few want more. So look at this, and I checked this number because I couldn't believe it. So look at the non-parents. 38% say they get too little information. So yet again, more evidence of some communication. And you may feel like you communicate a lot, but I always say when we do campaigns that when you're completely exhausted from communicating, that's when you start. Okay. So then over the past year, 7 out of 10 parents have attended at least 5 events on campus. Predictably, among non-parents, the comparable figure is lower, 2 out of 10, with nearly 4 out of 10 attending no events. So go figure. So these non-parents, they don't get as much information. Oh, I actually made the point. Recall that 38% of non-parents reported receiving too little information from the New Albany schools, and just as many don't go to any events. So it's not clear which way the causal arrow is going, But presumably, if they went to events, they would have more information. Or if they had more information, maybe they would go to the events. But something's up there. That 38% is big. And then across the grade spans, you can see really not a huge difference by grade span. A couple of concluding observations. So among community residents' impressions, the New Albany schools across myriad dimensions are positive indeed. Indeed, a majority of residents describe the schools as both excellent and heading in the right direction. Positive impressions are notably more common among parents with children enrolled in the schools and less common among non-parents, residents of Plain Township, and older residents, the overlap notwithstanding. Overall, non-parents know less about the New Albany schools and, as a consequence, have fewer opinions. That said, many of these residents, especially men, are open to more information about the schools. And for many residents, both parents and non-parents, the district's top priorities should center on academic achievement, safety, and mental health, areas where most of the New Albany schools, are currently strong. Areas where residents perceive the district as less strong, but not weak, just less strong, include class size, many want smaller classes, listening to the concerns of local residents, many, especially men, want more listening, and fiscal responsibility. Many want more transparency. In addition, most residents were either unaware of or dissatisfied with the district's efforts to implement cost-saving measures to extend the taxpayers' dollar. Despite these perceived weaknesses, the vast majority of residents believe that the New Albany schools are committed to fulfilling its mission, to fulfilling this culture of accountability. Questions?
They don't think we're expecting.
And I typically don't leave until somebody asks something.
Oh, they're going to ask.
I'll start with an easy one. The specific answers, the open-ended questions, that information, you're sending that to us?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's stripped of its identifying.
Sure.
But yeah, and definitely read them. They are, they're interesting. They're not trivial comments. I mean, they're comments of substance oftentimes. So that's helpful.
I'm just curious, with safety as such a big theme, how were people thinking about safety? Like, how was safety defined for people? Was it like, related to interactions between students, like bullying, or was it more, protecting kids from someone who might try to enter the building, or was it all of that?
Okay, so bullying would be a separate topic, a separate code. Safety is threats from the outside.
Oh.
And it wouldn't be surprising, since that's pretty, unfortunately, not popular, but current,
News, yeah.
sort of a current issue.
Okay, thank you.
And we didn't have a lot of bullying comments. In fact, in one of the quotes you may have seen, the dissatisfaction, there was one person said, "My kid was bullied for the 6th time." But there was very little of that.
Do you, I know you do this type of work, you survey for other school districts, and I know the questions are going to be different, so I'm not asking for a straight up comparison, but can you just generally talk about the perceptions that people have in New Albany of the schools versus what you might see in other places? Are people typically happy with their local school district, or do you see big disparity in those results sometimes?
No. Some people are happy, but when we've done this for the Columbus schools, what's notable about there, generally folks are not happy, but there's a big, at least when we polled last, the big racial divide. African Americans much happier than non-African Americans. But the numbers don't come close to here. A lot of times they're positive, but not like this.
What about the other suburban districts?
Hilliard was strong when last we did Hilliard, and Dublin was strong. And some of the others, like Gahanna, Jefferson, it's too long ago to even remember. But in some ways, it doesn't matter what the other districts are, because the frame of reference for these folks is, especially their kids, of what they're finding here. So it would be great. I wish I could tell you that all like the 50 school districts in Central Ohio, that everybody had numbers like this. It wouldn't devalue your numbers in any way. It would be a great thing.
I think that comment is useful for a lot of topics. You know, what matters is what we're doing here.
And here's sort of the thing that I always don't like about numbers so high. So then there's a tendency to pick on things. So you end up describing something as the lowest when it's ridiculously high. It just ended up being the lowest. So if you have several of your dimensions at 98, and then you got your lowest in the 80s, gee, it's really tough to describe that as negative. I mean, just a little.
Well, the benefits of the clarity of our statement of purpose, the creating a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic and developmental outcomes for each student, is that it ties in with what the community also says is important. So in terms of picking on things, we're focused. So I'm really not concerned about us, picking on a particular thing, and we're focused on the same things that the community says is important to them. And we're trying to make that better every year because that's what's important. And what I see as the biggest opportunity is to help other members of the community who don't know about the good things that are happening, to help them know and to provide them the information. But I'm not really concerned here that we'll start picking on things that aren't important.
So that's a huge opportunity, I think, communication. I think that's huge. But the notion of trying to make things better every year, noble, but difficult with numbers like this. But go for it. By all means, go for it. But have reasonable expectations. If you get like a 92, there's some percentage of people who will, maybe they don't even listen. They hold the phone up in the air when we call them, although we try to discourage that, as you could imagine. So at some point, so now you're not fighting for the C, D, and E evaluators into the A's and B's. You may never shrink those minuscule percentage of folks. You're fighting for the people who think it's a B district into the A district.
Again, the good news is that we're not focused on the polling results. We're focused on the academic results for kids. Right? As long as we keep focused on kids and doing the right things for kids, parents are generally going to be happy.
Yeah, I agree.
Although we paid you for polling results, so we do like those too.
We do, especially when they look like this.
Marty, do you recall, and again, just to go back to the previous question, I wasn't looking for anything specific in terms of trying to compare us to another school.
Yes, you were.
No, wanting to really point out the level of support. I mean, yeah, you can look and say, well, 98%, well, maybe just everybody loves their school. I think these are really good numbers, and I don't think you see them everywhere. Do you recall from the last time, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, you did a survey for us. Do you recall what the numbers were then on some of these issues? I know we asked a lot of similar questions.
I don't recall.
Okay.
We can go back and look and see.
But just to kind of dovetail to your point, though, we're fortunate that we have really high support But I do think that as people continue to see what we are doing to focus on academics, those numbers, I'm just curious as to whether or not they did move a little bit over the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, they probably didn't move down.
I don't think so.
I mean, the other point you made about, people sort of like their stuff. Like we do a lot of community attitudes as opposed to schools. And so we did one for New Albany. And if you compare those results to the people who live in Whitehall, we do that one. All of this is in the public domain. You can go on their websites and see it. It's a huge, it's not that you don't know this, but this actually turns up on the surveys. Huge difference in how people feel about their community. Huge. So people, they're loyal, but they're not like blind. And the thing about these data is the big challenge, if you think about sort of the long-term and funding, is to bring the non-parents into the fold. Because they don't even dislike you. Tiny numbers.
They just don't know.
Right.
They just don't know. And so when they dislike you, there's two barriers. You gotta convince them that, to like you and then get them into the fold. But here, all you have to do is get them into the fold. So it's a lot easier. You're not changing an attitude.
But don't you see that in your experience in polling, that the less happy people are, the more likely they are to venture an opinion?
Hence the issue. Because if you're in a community or dealing with a product that is not stellar, then ignorance is bliss, right? They don't know, so they just assume, they give it the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, I was thinking exactly the opposite.
But sometimes when they know how bad it is. If it's bad. But here, there's lots of folks, maybe a third of the community, without opinions on many of these issues, but they don't dislike you. They're not negative. They're just not knowledgeable.
Right. That's what I was trying to understand. In your polling, do you see that when opinions are generally more negative, that a higher percentage of people have an opinion, or do you not see that? So here we have very high, people generally have very positive opinions, but a third of non-residents don't have any because they don't know, right? If our positive rating was 50%, would we see a lower number than a third, a lower percentage that had no opinion? Would there be a higher response rate if people actually had an opinion, or don't you know?
Not necessarily. Could be, but not necessarily. And in fact, all of the bars, the little footnote said, the people without opinion were factored out. That's why a bar could be 85%, and then the don't know is 35%, because it's just of the people who have opinions. So even if you go back here, you'll notice that on some high no opinion items, the numbers are strong. So it's not that just because there's a lot of people with no opinions that the numbers are going to be more negative. Because the people who have opinions based on whatever the facts are. But having an opinion to some extent is a reflection of what information they have. Clearly. So there's not a lot of negative information in the community relative to a community like Columbus, with this sort of organized opposition, and just lots of bad things happen routinely and are in the press routinely. Even with the new superintendent.
Not ours.
Not ours.
Yeah. So there's definitely some opportunity coming out of this. Do you help us with recommendations for next steps, or you hand this off to us to look at, where we want to focus now?
Yeah, we're a company that knows its limitations.
Okay.
So we're not in public relations. We give you this in an unbiased way without any thought that the superintendent will call us back and say, "Oh yeah, help us with phase 2 of this."
You're out.
We're out until maybe a couple years, down the line, you will have done things, and then you want us to take another look. But yeah, there are lots of firms that go from start to finish. We like our little niche.
So
So the action would come back to the administration. So we'll get all the information from Marty, and we'll go through and look at the disaggregated information that's available for the open-ended questions. Then board leadership will have conversations to try to create what the action plan is going to be, will be folded into the continuous improvement plan for 2019 and 20. All that piece and parts are there. Communication with the age demographic 55 plus is probably one of the things I would just tell you, and going through this multiple times, it's something we have to figure out for non-parent resident persons. How do we get to them? So how do we try to create a connection with them that we currently don't have? 38% of them are saying we know nothing about the schools. So that's a problem. So we have to figure out how to get to that demographic. I would tell you that's one of the things I would put on the list. There's other things in it I'm not surprised by at all. Marty and I had this conversation on the phone. So I'll use Ken in the high school. So the fact that the survey overwhelmingly shows that high school parents prefer face-to-face communication does not surprise me at all about New Albany High School. Or that they feel that there's less information coming from high school teachers doesn't really surprise me either, because part of that is my child's now in high school, so I'm hands off, or I want to be hands off, but my child's in high school and my child's saying, get hands off. So it's just the reality of being in high school. So I'm not surprised by that either. So we'll go through it as a leadership team to try to pick specific things that we think we can continue to do. But to Marty's point, there are many celebrations in the data that reinforce the incredible culture we've created across the school district and how we do engage both our parent population and the students, but also some residents. So we are having success in a community perspective. Please don't misunderstand that I don't think that. I do. I think that's our greatest opportunity in looking at this is what do we do to get to those people that we currently have not engaged with.
So I have one other thought. So I believe that for every 10 things I tell you, you ought to already know 9 of them, which makes it very difficult to refute the 10th one. And that's what this is about. I mean, your ears are to the ground every day.
Right.
So if this was a complete surprise to you, like, where have you been? So I know that, but the hope is that you learn a few things that you didn't know, that you don't say, they interviewed the wrong people, or a question was worded badly. It's harder to dismiss a finding you're not comfortable with. If the 9 other ones, you think, that makes sense to me. So there's a little perspective. And I appreciate that this data is not the sole source of decision-making, because if it was, I would have driven up here in a nicer car. This is going to square with other things and you'll form a blended opinion based on all of the data sources.
That's great. Thank you.
Marty, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I look forward to connecting to get the rest of the information, and we can continue our work behind the scenes.
Cool.
thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you all.
Next item on the agenda is an update from PLE.
Hi, Mrs. Tuttle.
You guys want to take one pass?
Yep.
That's right. This doesn't move, does it? You guys can hear me, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, so just a quick update from PLE. We have a lot of our members doing great things inside and outside of the classroom. So I'm just gonna give you guys a few examples here. Roy Cheney attended the Army Educator Tour June 10th through 13th this summer at Fort Lee, Virginia. During the tour, she saw 10 different military operational specialties, or also known as military jobs, including explosive, ordnance disposal, water and petroleum specialists, and vehicle maintenance. Every military occupational specialty connection to civilian careers and public certifications was clarified and explained. Other experiences during the tour included participations in the simulated and virtual reality modules that the soldiers are trained on. Options for students after high school need to include military and trade careers. Increased awareness of these opportunities by staff allows every student to have options that fulfill their needs and interests for future plans. Another example is second grade teacher Becky Wanless traveled around the country this summer as a certified trainer for the Center for Responsive Schools. She facilitated engaging learning experiences for close to 100 K-5 educators in North Carolina, Ohio, Virginia, and California. Responsive Classroom is an evidence-based approach to education that focuses on the strong relationship between academic success and social-emotional learning. The Responsive Classroom approach empowers educators to create safe, joyful, and engaging learning communities where all students have a sense of belonging and feel significant. All right, thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, discussion items tonight. Any board liaison reports? Okay, then that brings us to our elementary curriculum update.
Mr. Emery.
Yes. Good evening, sir.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share about our elementary curriculum initiatives. Our focus areas for the 2018-19 school year were in the areas of writing, reading, and math, as well as securing a 5-star rating from Ohio for our preschool program. For writing, we implemented the Units of Study program at the primary and intermediate schools with the goal of providing a guaranteed and viable curriculum that would result in increased student scores on the essay portion of the Ohio English Language Arts test in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. In grades 3, 4, and 5, students compose one essay on the state test that is assessed using a 10-point grading scale. Specifically, we were concerned with how many of our 3rd and 4th grade students were scoring 0 or only 1 point on their essays. And we were also concerned that our overall essay scores in grades 3 to 6 were not as high as our teachers, parents, and community expect. So how did our students perform on their essays on the recent state exams at the conclusion of our first year of the Units of Study implementation? In 3rd grade, the percentage of students scoring at least 6 points increased from 25% in 2018 to 52% in 2019, a 27% increase. Students scoring 0 or 1 point decreased from 19% in 2018 down to 6% in 2019. In 4th grade, students scoring at least 6 points increased from 45% in 2018 to 54% in 2019, a 9% increase. Students scoring 0 or 1 point in 4th grade decreased from 6% last year to 2% this school year. In 5th grade, students scoring at least 7 points on their essays increased from 19% in 2018 to 26% in 2019, a 7% increase. In grade 6, students compose an informational essay and an argumentative essay. Each of those essays are worth 10 points for a total of 20 points. In 6th grade, students scoring at the state's highest level, called above proficient, increased from 22% last school year to 46% in 2019, a 24% increase. Overall, we were pleased with the results of our students in our first year of implementing this program developed at Columbia University. I'd like to recognize our instructional specialists, Angelica Johnson and Kristen Messenheimer, who presented the Units of Study program to you at your December meeting, for their outstanding work providing job-embedded professional development to our teachers this past school year. For reading, we implemented a new online phonics and word study program for preschool to 5th grade students called Lexia Core 5. The core areas that are addressed in Lexia Core 5 are phonological awareness, structural analysis, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. At the early grades, Lexia is a wonderful supplement to our teacher-led explicit and systematic phonics program, Wilson Foundations. At the intermediate school, Lexia helps review foundational skills taught in Foundations, as well as allow students to move at an individualized pace through advanced topics such as Greek roots, analogies, and context clues. So how did our students perform on their reading assessments this school year? From reviewing scores from the Measures of Academic Progress, or MAP testing, we saw increases in reading performance in grades 3 and 4 when comparing spring 2018 average scores to spring 2019. In 3rd grade specifically, our average score increased from the 70th to the 74th percentile from 2018 to 2019, a 4 percentile point increase. Also for third grade, I'm proud to announce for the third consecutive year, we will have a 100% rating on Ohio's third grade reading guarantee measure. Very few districts in Franklin County achieve this level of success. Last school year, only 3 districts earned the perfect rating, and only 2 of those districts did it twice in a row, which of course includes us. So based on preliminary results, we achieved a passage rate on the state's third grade ELA exam of 92%, the first time we've ever earned over 90% on this test. So congratulations to Principal Smith and her team at the primary school, as well as all the teachers at the ELC for their early literacy work. At the intermediate school, based on preliminary data, we are pleased to see the difference between New Albany's fourth grade ELA passage rate and the Ohio passage rate was 22%. The largest gap we've ever had between us and the state since we started OST testing. And we saw the percentage of our fifth grade students scoring at the top advanced level increasing 7% from last year to 49%. 49% is the highest percentage ever for our fifth grade students scoring at the advanced level. For math, we implemented College Prep Mathematics, or CPM, and intermediate math courses that teach sixth grade content and above. This includes Math 6, Pre-Algebra A, Pre-Algebra B, and Algebra 1. CPM was discussed in depth at your last meeting, so I only will address briefly a question raised by Board Vice President Darrow about data that compares 2018 school year performance to the 2019 school year. For sixth grade specifically, we saw an increase in spring MAP scores of 2.3 points for math when compared to spring 2018. When converted to national percentiles, our average spring 2019 percentile score was at the 74th national percentile, a 1 percentage point gain from last school year. I'd like to thank our CPM secondary math instructional leader, Aaron Jones, who spoke at your last meeting, and our intermediate math teacher leaders, Kristen Zolwig and Megan Laboon, for their leadership with the CPM adoption at the intermediate school this past year. And finally, specific to the Early Learning Center, I would like to recognize Michelle Unger and Jackie Zieber for securing a 5-star rating for our preschool program. Looking to next school year, we're excited to expand some of our pilots to full implementations. First, we'll expand units of study and writing to all kindergarten classes. Next, after a trial on several sixth grade classes, we'll implement the partner program to units of study and writing, which is aptly named Units of Study and Reading, to all sixth grade English Language Arts classes. After last year's pilot, we'll expand the Bridges Math program to our pre-K classes to give those students an advantage going into our kindergarten program at the ELC. In addition to new implementations, we will keep a focus toward continuous improvement on our recent initiatives. Too often in education, there's an intense focus on a program only in its first year of implementation. We want to make sure we continue to monitor our programs closely and adjust them when needed to make sure they're meeting the academic needs of our students. In closing, I'd like to thank Superintendent Sawyers for his commitment to professional development for our teachers. We have adopted several new programs at the elementary level the past 2 years, and Superintendent Sawyers has supported us through making sure our teachers have the resources and training they need to implement these programs effectively through job-embedded professional development. And also, I'd like to thank all of you, our board, for focusing on outcomes. It is refreshing to have clear expectations that are measurable and the support to make decisions based on data. I have worked in situations where even if the data was telling us one thing, we weren't allowed to deviate from the school board's 5-year strategic plan. I appreciate that the board's statement of purpose and continuous improvement plan allows for the administrative team to be nimble. We can respond quickly to data to help improve the academic and developmental outcomes for our students. Again, thank you for allowing me time to update you on our elementary curriculum initiatives, and I welcome any questions you have about these initiatives and their alignment to the statement of purpose and continuous improvement plan.
That was a pretty good presentation. Thank you.
Seeing no questions.
It was all positive,
Thank you.
so,
Thanks,
yeah,
Jeff.
thanks. That's fine. Public participation, anyone? Okay, then we'll move on to treasurer's items. Can I get a motion on treasurer's items A through D? Oh, board policy. Oops, I'm
You're
sorry.
just moving along. It's okay. I know
We'll come back to
it's
public
such
participation.
excitement. So, Board of Education members, you have in your board agenda 6 policies, 2 of which are proposed for revisions related to student handbook, and there's one that's a new policy specifically for use of social media. So I'm happy to entertain questions. They get on the technology path. We've been combing through all the policies to make sure there's direct alignment and the refinement for student handbooks that will be presented to you at your July 8th meeting. So this is the last wave of those policies that will then be incorporated into somehow, some way, the majority of them, student handbooks that you'll see for July 8th. But happy to talk about any of them you have specific questions about.
All right, with no questions, now we can move on to treasurer's items.
Sorry.
We just really wanted to get to the finances.
So moved.
You already checked about. Okay, who seconded? I'm sorry.
Bush.
Mr. Bush.
You guys are going a little too fast. Monthly financials, we are running, as we've been discussing the last couple of months, we've collected more money in revenue than anticipated, and we're spending less on our expenditure side. So continue. That's through May. I expect that trend to continue through June, so we will end a little better than anticipated. Because we have because we've collected a little more revenue and we're under on our expenses, that allows us the opportunity to transfer some funds into the permanent improvement fund to continue to put money aside for the roofs, the boilers, those kinds of things. So the next item that I have in transfer of fund is $1.8 million from general fund to permanent improvement fund. Then I am also requesting that the board approve moving $240,000 from the general fund to permanent improvement, but that fund is actually for the turf replacement. So when the district actually accepted the turf field from the volunteers who raised money, part of that condition, and there was a resolution passed that the board would continue to set some funds aside every year, $20,000, to help offset half of the cost of replacement. The then booster group that said they would also pay for half of that replacement is no longer intact, and the new booster group is not taking on that goal because that was not their goal. So because the board will likely have to pay for the entire replacement, I'm suggesting that because we have some of these funds and we've spent less, that we start putting a little more money aside. We currently have about $140,000 that has been set aside. This 240,000 or 40,000 would then add to that. We also know that in that original fundraising, there's still about $95,000 in an account at the foundation where that money is being held, and that is for the replacement. So I feel that with this transfer, the money that we've already transferred plus that $95,000, that would cover the replacement of the football field. I do know that we are looking at naming rights, so should we find someone who gives the right amount of money, if we go down that path, to replace the football field, these funds would be intact, because then in another 10 to 15 years, it will need replaced again. So that's the two transfers that I have. Then I have our fiscal year 20 permanent appropriations. These are a combination of all of the budgets that have been submitted by buildings and departments. It is also our payroll for next year and benefits for next year. And so fiscal year 20 actually, and this budget ends up being the first year of the 5-year forecast. We create the budget, especially for salaries and benefits, by pulling everyone out of our system, payroll system, make sure they are accurate, then stepping them according to negotiated agreements and other contractual obligations. So that then is actual what we expect for next year. And that total, all funds, is $93.2 million. That's every fund, and there is actually a attachment on the agenda if you want to look and see every fund that is available. And then $66.3 million of that is general fund. And then I also have student parking permit fee, approving that. It is $25 per semester. That's the same that has been from last year.
Any questions?
Just a comment on the turf replacement. I suppose it could be a question as well. I mean, it seems prudent, the action that you're recommending. I think it's a good reminder that gifts to put something in place that is permanent. The expense is permanent. The funding isn't always as permanent. And so it's just it's a reminder that as anytime we think of additional programming, those tend never to die and the expenses tend never to die, and only increase, but the revenue source for them is not as reliable.
Any other comments or questions? Have a roll call, please.
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
President McClelland?
Yes. That brings us to superintendent's items, so I will request a motion on items 8A through D.
So moved.
Second.
Newmoff, Ms. Kalinowski. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan. Board of Education members, the personnel section are standard employee action items related to either summer professional development, summer specific stipends for clubs, groups, or other activities that will occur pursuant to the negotiated agreements and their required contractual terms of compensation, as well as our hiring that will continue for the 2019-2020 school year. There will still be a few positions left that we're currently going through the interview processes for, and or the classified staff positions that will be filled in late July and most likely early August prior to the start of the new school year. The last thing on the personnel is a correction item from last agenda to identify the correct funding source based upon federal dollars that were available. Letter B this evening is general business. Again, recommendation to approve the specific actions for the Board of Education is standard. We have the district property, violence, pollution, liability, and auto insurance. We went through the competitive bid process through the consortia and are recommending Ohio School Plan continue to be the insurance carrier for the school district. Senior waivers pursuant to Board of Education policy, and then field trips as always. And recommendation for out of town. The last thing under general business this evening is an approval of amendment to the service contract with Nationwide Children's Hospital. You will recall Children's Hospital is the sports medicine, athletic training services that we receive. They're exemplary for the school district. We have an outstanding partnership with Nationwide Children's Hospital, recommending this evening an extension of the contract as well as an amendment to include strength and conditioning services for both our middle school and high school athletes on a weekly basis. Letter C this evening is Board of Education policy, and again, the policies that I previously referred to for action this evening so they can be incorporated into the student handbooks that will be presented to you for the July 8th Board of Education meeting. And then lastly, letter D, as always, we are very grateful for the donations that we receive as a school district from many benefactors that benefit our students, faculty, and staff across the entire school district. There are several this past month in relationship to the high school robotics team for their world championship. They've started looking towards the horizon, anticipating that next school year is going to result in bigger and better things, and have already started their fundraising to try to solicit additional donations to offset their expenditures that would be incorporated within their program. In addition to that, as always, we're very grateful to New Albany Community Foundation for the education grants that we receive on an annual basis. We do go through a revised competitive application process for the foundation, and they're awarding numerous grants to the school district, again, for the 2019-20 school year based upon proposals submitted by teachers or administrators within the school district. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
President McClelland?
Yes. Our second opportunity for public participation. With no one, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. Second. That was quick.
I'm sorry, who motioned and
This is
seconded?
Mr. Darrow, Mr. Bush. Roll call, please.
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski? Yes. President McClelland?
Yes. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is July 8th, 4 p.m.
Scott.